Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in because today's show might just open your eyes to a different way of thinking. So recently I was on a call with an equipment manufacturer and we're talking through strategies and ways that we could join forces and mutually support the growth of our group practice customers. And as we were discussing upgrades and the investment needed to achieve those replacements, well, we came to a place in the conversation where the subject of sale or exit was the next kind of natural stop on the tracks. And the reason I bring that up is because a couple people on the call mentioned some pain points that their reps see in the field related to sale and exit. Among them, questions from owners such as, why should I replace my old equipment or upgrade anything if I'm thinking of selling my business in the future? It seems like a valid question, right? So why should I invest a bunch of money to have a new owner enjoy the upgrades? Well, there are plenty of reasons actually, and you'll want to hear those. So we're going to explain exactly why you need to invest in your business, even if you're looking to transact. And I know you'll all agree with us by the end of the show. So here with me today, as well as on that call I mentioned, is Polaris founder and CEO, Diwakar Sinha. And Diwakar is going to help us uncover the reasons you should be thinking about updating and upgrading the equipment and your business, even if you're planning to sell. Diwakar, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, those questions that I mentioned that we heard on that call, they're valid. And I think that's a common way of thinking. And I mentioned that in our intro for that very purpose. We find that some owners are really reluctant to invest in new equipment if they're thinking of selling. And we want to help them get some clarity and understand why that might not be the best way to think about a CapEx investment. I know it's a pain point for sales reps. The guys on the call mentioned that it's one that's commonly mentioned in the field, as well as in the businesses they support. Docs don't want to re-equip their offices if they plan to sell, and they don't understand why they should upgrade. So why don't we start there? What should sellers be thinking about with the age of their equipment? So let's keep in mind first that they might not be even thinking of transacting till 2027 or 2030. So what do they need to consider in terms of the age of their equipment or their office in general?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one key point to consider is when you're investing in CapEx or capital expenditure in your practice, buyers are looking at a few aspects of buckets. One is holistically, they're looking at your average age of equipment, within your business. Overall, you want it to be around 5 years as an average or median age. I think people need to put your kind of detach from a lens and say, nobody wants to buy a practice where the average age of equipment is 15 or 20 years.
Right.
Because I think, you're investing a lot in service and repairs and things like that and downtime. And really, it's not just the service and repairs. It's really the downtime of the equipment where they cannot see patients and things like that they have to be worried about. I think the service costs, things like that, are the minimal things that they have to be concerned with. So that's one aspect of it. So 5 years is really the median. So you're going to have some things that are probably 8 to 9 years, 10 years, and some things that are going to be closer to 2 to 3 years that they're looking for. So that's one aspect that you want to be concerned about or focused on. Two is just like when you're buying a house or selling a house. Let me kind of focus on this way. Is a lot of people think about like upgrading their pool. And, let's say your house is worth $400,000 or $500,000. A lot of people upgrade their pool or put in a pool in their house the year they're selling their house, and then say, okay, my house is worth, 500,000. I'm going to put in 20,000 or 25,000 for a pool, and my house should be worth 525,000. Well, that's not how it works. So you're not going to get a dollar for dollar return on all the equipment upgrades you put in the year you transact your practice. So that's not how you should be thinking about capital expenditure as well. So you need to be investing into your capital equipment probably 2 to 5 years before you actually transact and leverage that into your practice and patient pool and saying, hey, we're doing well. We want to invest into the technology we have and growing your patient revenue, patient pool, and to growing your EBITDA into your practice and growing the business. That's how you're really going to get your best ROI. So if your practice is doing, let's say, $5 million or $15 million, and you upgrade your digital pens and your chairs and things like that, and you can grow your revenue just by 3% or 4% because you were able to upgrade your equipment. And that one extra percent to the bottom line, or 2%, because you're paying your doctors additional on that collections and your assistants and things like that. That one extra percent on $15 million is an extra $150,000 to the bottom line. If you just have the multiple on that, more than makes up for some of the equipment capex you would have paid for. And again, please understand the capex you paid for is depreciation. So that's added back into your EBITDA. Again, if you call us, we can kind of work through that process to kind of have you understand the return on investment. But these kind of things help you get a better return on investment as you're going into the transaction. But again, these decisions have to be made a few years in advance to your transaction. That's one component of it. The other component is from a buyer's lens. They want to make sure that they're not having to invest into that right after a transaction. And if they are, they're going to probably underwrite that into the deal. So if a deal was going to transact at, let's say, $10 million, they're going to have to say, okay, we're going to have to put in an extra $200,000 or $500,000 into a capex reserve. That's one component of it. The other aspect they might be thinking about is the growth strategy that they have to be thinking about in case they're thinking about growing the business. If the office is not up to date with the technology and their growth strategy, they might be thinking about implementing. And I'll pick a resource. So, for example, let's say they're thinking about same day dentistry, and the practice doesn't have in-house lab or in-house milling unit. So they might be thinking about a CEREC in the offices or an in-house lab milling into a centralized facility. So they might be saying, okay, we need to invest $500,000 or $1 million into a CapEx equipment into that. Now they're going to underwrite that as part of their purchase price within that facility. Now, if you're transacting in 2 to 3 years or 5 years, and we can work with that client to think about the return on investment of acquiring that equipment and growing the business through the efficiencies that CapEx investment would provide that business and the increased patient flow they would have over the next 2 to 5 years through that process, our client can realize that improved EBITDA, improved revenue, and transact at a higher process. So these are the kind of things we would be thinking about from a sell side lens, but also from a buy side perspective that we would be advising the client on, that I think our audience members need to be thinking about as they're thinking about going to market in the next 2 to 5 years in that process.
Well, sure. I'm going to jump back to something that you said with concern to sellers and patient flow. These upgrades, these differences, in particular, the things that you said about in house milling, you can market that to patients. If you can get that service done in one day for your patients, that's a huge value. So, all of these things that roll in there can be marketed back to patients to increase your patient flow. And of course, that's going to increase your valuation. But then jumping back to the buyer's view of a CapEx investment that you were just mentioning. So within the valuation profile, what are buyers thinking about with that practice or group, like particularly within the deal itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they're looking at it and saying, okay, we're going to invest in this practice, 5 million, 25 million, whatever the deal check size is. Not only the underwriting, how the deal is being structured as far as employment agreements, how the deal is going to look post sale with the associates and things like that, but they're also looking at it and saying, hey, what is the ongoing capital expenditure, right? So they're going to go back 24 months into a deal, sometimes longer, depending on the type of the deal, and saying, okay, what kind of capital improvements has this practice been making within the practice? So they're going to go back, look at depreciation the last 2 years. We underwrite the deal 2 to 3 years back. When we take a deal to market, I think I've talked about in our previous podcast that it takes us a while to take a deal to market because we're going back 2 to 3 years. And so if they don't see a lot of depreciation, within the deal. Nothing wrong with that. They're going to say, okay, now what is the age of the equipment? So they have to underwrite those things and say, okay, what is the improvements we have to make within the practice to grow the practice within that? Digital pans, if it's 3D CT machines within the practice, if they're trying to improve clinical focus in that. We talked about that in clinical coaching as far as improving the procedure mix, within the practice. So these are the kind of things that they're underwriting, saying, okay, how can we grow the practice? So if it doesn't have a CT machine and they're going to add specialty procedures within the practice to grow the keeping more services in house, these are things they have to underwrite as part of the process into the deal upfront. Again, not that it's going to lower the valuation meaningfully, but again, these are things that have to be underwritten because this is cash deployment that might be necessary for the buyer that they have to think about in the first 12 to 24 months. When I was on the credit side of banking, on the senior credit side, we typically saw whatever the check size was of deployment, that 10 to 15% of the check size was being deployed typically towards CapEx within the first 18 to 24 months. Wow. So if a purchase price was, let's say, $10 million on a typical transaction, typically about $1 million to $1.5 million was being deployed towards CapEx within the first 18, 24 months towards upgrades within a business. And that could be for various things. It could be for CT machines across a platform, could be towards CEREC machines or different, just equipment upgrades on that. So typically, what we do recommend is for businesses to think about a CapEx line as they're acquiring businesses of different sizes, to kind of be thinking about those things as they're acquiring.
Well, and that was my next question, for growing groups, I'll put it that way. What is a recommended CapEx line, or what's a typical CapEx allocation? And should they be looking at a DTTL in addition to that?
Yeah. So, I think businesses should have two things, right? So, and we'll talk about this on our on a future podcast. If we talk about growth facilities, most businesses should have probably should have three different relationships within their banking relationships. One should be obviously some kind of they'll have a loan facility, which is like, hey, I have a loan, I'm paying back that loan. That's their installment loan. Fixed amount they borrowed, fixed payment, they're paying back every single month. So that's their traditional loan that they have. On top of that, they should have a CapEx line. Typically, it's going to be a line of credit that they can draw upon. That is the purpose of that. The use of that is to be able to buy equipment from their equipment distribution company. And that could be for chairs, handsaps, CEREC machines, whatever that is, from the distribution company, and that they draw upon. And as they need it, they pay it back and they draw upon again. And that typically should be about 5 to 10% of their total revenue. This one, depending on how much they're utilizing it. And the goal would be that they pay it back typically within about 24 to 36 months. And I would recommend that for a lot of the audience members to kind of think about. Another 5% should be their working capital line of credit. And I would absolutely not use it unless there's a cash flow crunch. And we've talked about, for most of our clients, to have about 6 months of operating reserves and capital reserves within the business. That should be what they should be thinking about within the business. And then lastly, you mentioned DDTL. So DDTL stands for Delayed Draw Term Loan. And that is, in our other podcasts in the past, we've talked about a warehouse facility or a line of credit for growth facility. So our clients can continue to grow in the market through acquisitions or de novos. And that's typically going to be some kind of a leverage facility that they can grow in the market. That's 2 to 3 times minimum their EBITDA, up to 4 times their EBITDA in the market. So that allows our clients to continue to grow in the market. So these are different kind of relationships they would have in the market to continue to grow in the market.
Well, and understanding that everyone wants a move-in ready house, and all of these elements kind of culminate together for that investment profile that we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. But can you tell our listeners, we do a lot of work with our clients on financial forecasting and the debt they needed to move forward and grow their business. Can you talk about how we help our clients do that, specifically if they want to transact in the next 2 to 3 years or more?
Yeah, if they're, looking to transact in 2027 to 2030, they need to start thinking about today as far as how they're thinking about CapEx, right? And how they're thinking about where they're transacting with any kind of acquisitions or any kind of de novo model of, depending on where they want to be in 27 or 2030 or 2035, what is the business they're trying to build, and what is the return on investment that would be looking at in the form of the growth strategy. So we can help them build out the business they're thinking about. If they did same store growth, if they thought about utilization growth within their same stores, and they said, okay, hey, you know what? Listen to your podcast. I was thinking about acquiring $500,000 or $300,000 in capital expenditure, or $1 million in capital expenditure. Based on this, we've been thinking about these upgrades, and we don't know what our return is going to be based on this. If we renegotiated our fee schedules, what does that look like for our business? How do we pay down this debt? How do we recreate the equity? We've talked about in different podcasts that, as you take on debt, you need to recreate equity within your business. We can help people do that and really create that in 2027, 2030, the equity they're looking to create on balance sheet to be able to create a successful equity and transaction event. So when they do go to a strategic partner or an equity partner at that point, we can show them what their decision point looks like. And again, we talked about in our podcast, we always want to make the decisions with the end in mind, and we can help them show, why are they making this decision in 2025, 2026 with a clear, definitive outcome.
Yeah, very good point. And hopefully we have alleviated that reluctance that we were hearing from our equipment manufacturer friends and what their reps here in the field, because all of those things are going to impact the bottom line, and they're going to impact the deal at the end of the day. So we want to get ahead of that. Make the move-in ready house, enjoy it for a couple of years, and then move on. Well, Diwakar, it's always great to have you on the show. And I know our listeners appreciate your financial and business experience, and our clients certainly benefit from your insight and direction as well. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, we talked about some of the reasons that you need to invest in your business at every stage, even before exit, but there's a lot more to consider, and Polaris is here to help. So please use us as a resource, reach out, and we'll be happy to set up a call. And if you'd like to learn about any of Polaris expert advisory services, or maybe there's a topic we haven't covered that you want to hear about, you can send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can visit our website at polarishealthcarepartners.com. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.